There is something you need to understand about respect. People begin judging your value before you ever open your mouth. The moment you enter a room, the human mind is already collecting information. Your posture, your pace, your eye contact, your facial expression, even the way you occupy physical space. This happens almost automatically. We are constantly searching for signals of confidence, insecurity, strength, uncertainty, status, and weakness. On the other hand, someone who appears calm and centered can command attention with very few words. Think about the people you naturally respect. Usually, they are not desperately trying to prove themselves. They don't rush to speak. They don't constantly check whether everyone approves of them. There is something controlled about their behavior. They seem comfortable with silence. They listen without looking distracted. When they move with intention. This is not about pretending to be powerful. You are studying their reactions instead of controlling your own. The person with presence does the opposite. Their attention begins with themselves. They are not asking, "Do they like me?" They are asking, "Am I composed? Am I clear? Am I acting according to my values?" Do you avoid eye contact? Do you laugh nervously after making a statement? Do you apologize when there is nothing to apologize for? These small behaviors may seem insignificant, but collectively they tell a story. The good news is that presence can be trained. Slow yourself down, not artificially, but deliberately. Before answering a difficult question, allow yourself a moment of silence. When someone speaks, actually listen instead of preparing your response. A person who cannot tolerate silence often feels compelled to fill it with explanations, jokes, excuses, or unnecessary words. But a person who is comfortable with silence communicates something different. I do not need to rush to prove my value. This does not mean becoming cold or arrogant. Presence is not about dominating everyone around you. It is about becoming internally stable enough that you don't need to dominate anyone. And this becomes especially important when someone challenges you. But if you can remain calm, listen, think, and respond deliberately, you demonstrate something far more powerful than aggression: self-command. Remember, people are watching what you do when you think nobody is judging you. They notice how you react under pressure. They notice whether your confidence disappears when you are criticized. They notice whether your words match your behavior. So don't enter a room trying to look powerful. Enter it determined to be composed, because the strongest presence is not the person demanding attention. It is the person who no longer needs it. Now, once you understand the power of presence, the next psychological shift is even more important. Stop chasing approval. This is difficult because human beings are social creatures. From childhood, we learn to look outward for acceptance. We learn to notice who approves of us, who rejects us, who praises us, and who criticizes us. Eventually, many people begin living as if their emotional stability depends on the opinions of others. And that is where respect begins to disappear. The moment you become desperate to be liked, you become easier to control. Someone gives you attention, and you move toward them. Someone withdraws attention, and you panic. Psychologically, however, you are teaching people that your boundaries are negotiable. Respect requires a certain degree of independence. This does not mean becoming arrogant, insensitive, or deliberately difficult. It means developing the ability to say, "I can value your opinion without allowing it to determine my identity." That distinction changes everything. Consider how often people over-explain themselves. They make a decision, someone questions it, and suddenly they begin producing a 10-minute defense. But confident people understand something very important. You do not need everyone to understand you. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply to state your position and allow others to disagree. This is where boundaries become psychologically significant. A boundary is not a threat. It is a declaration of what you will participate in and what you will not. When you consistently enforce that boundary, people learn how to interact with you. If you say you will not tolerate disrespect, but repeatedly tolerate it, your words become meaningless. Your behavior teaches people your standards. And this is why approval seeking is so dangerous. Every time you sacrifice your principles simply to avoid temporary discomfort, you weaken your relationship with yourself. Eventually, you may receive the approval you wanted while losing something much more valuable: your own self-respect. There is also a philosophical lesson here. You cannot control how people perceive you. You cannot force someone to admire you. You cannot control how people perceive you. You can control whether you react impulsively. You can control whether you betray your values for acceptance. You can control whether you remain calm when someone disapproves of you. This is where psychological freedom begins. And strangely enough, once you stop desperately seeking approval, people often begin giving you more of it. Why? Because independence is attractive. A person who does not desperately need validation appears more secure. Their attention becomes valuable because it is freely given rather than desperately offered. But be careful, do not turn this insight into another performance. Don't pretend you don't care what anyone thinks, simply to appear mysterious or powerful. That is still dependence, only disguised as indifference. The real goal is internal stability. You can listen to criticism without collapsing. You can accept praise without becoming addicted to it. You can appreciate affection without becoming dependent upon it. You can walk away from people who repeatedly violate your standards without needing revenge or dramatic explanations. That is strength. So the next time you feel the urge to prove yourself, pause. Ask yourself, am I acting from conviction, or am I acting from the fear of being rejected? That single question can reveal how much of your behavior is truly your own. Respect begins when your need to be accepted ends. And once you stop chasing approval, another transformation becomes possible. You begin to understand the power of your words. Most people talk too much. They speak because silence makes them uncomfortable. They explain because they fear being misunderstood. They repeat themselves because they want to make certain everyone accepts their point. And without realizing it, they dilute their own authority. There is a psychological principle here that is easy to miss. The more freely you give something away, the less valuable it can appear. When every thought is immediately spoken, when every emotion is publicly displayed, when every decision comes with a long explanation, people have less reason to pay close attention. This is why restraint can create presence. Think about someone who speaks slowly, listens carefully, and chooses their words deliberately. When they finally speak, people tend to listen, not necessarily because every word is brilliant, but because the person has created a pattern of selectivity. Their speech has weight because they are not constantly producing it. Before you speak, ask yourself, does this need to be said? Does it add something? Am I communicating, or am I trying to prove something? That last question is particularly important. Many people use conversation as a psychological battlefield. They are not actually listening. They are waiting for their opportunity to demonstrate intelligence, defend their ego, or establish superiority. Every disagreement, that phrase, "I don't know," is surprisingly powerful. Why? Because it demonstrates that your identity is not dependent on appearing omniscient. You are confident enough to admit the limits of your knowledge. And ironically, that honesty can increase credibility. There is another important element: emotional control. If someone insults you and you immediately react, your words are now being dictated by them. Notice what these statements have in common. They do not beg, they do not over-explain, they leave room for the other person to think, and that is an important aspect of authority. You don't have to control every conclusion people reach. Let your words create space. This is especially powerful in conflict. When emotions rise, most people increase the volume of their speech. They talk faster, become defensive, bring up old arguments, and attempt to overwhelm the other person with information often appears psychologically stronger. This is also why listening is such an underrated form of power. When you listen carefully, you learn what people value, what they fear, what they want, and what they are trying to conceal. Speech reveals information, but attentive silence allows information to come to you. So don't rush to fill every pause. Let people reveal themselves, and when you finally speak, make your words precise. Say what you mean. Don't bury a simple truth beneath 10 unnecessary explanations. Don't apologize for having reasonable boundaries, because when you stop using words to prove your worth, your words begin to carry weight. Speak less. Observe more. Let your restraint become your authority. Speak. And once you learn to control your words, you face another essential lesson in earning respect: learning to establish boundaries without becoming emotional. A boundary is one of the clearest expressions of self-respect. It tells the world without unnecessary aggression what you will accept and what you will not. Yet many people struggle with boundaries because they confuse kindness with unlimited availability. If you are constantly available, constantly forgiving, constantly accepting disrespect, people may appreciate your usefulness while gradually losing respect for your standards. Human beings learn from patterns. They observe what you tolerate, what you ignore, and what you repeatedly allow. Your boundaries teach people how to treat you. Imagine someone repeatedly interrupts you. The first time, perhaps you ignore it. The second time, you become irritated but say nothing. Eventually, interruption becomes normal. You don't need an emotional speech. You don't need to insult them. You can simply say, "Let me finish," or "I want to complete my thought." Then continue. Notice the difference. You are not trying to punish the person, you are establishing a standard. This is where many people misunderstand strength. They think strength means becoming intimidating. But intimidation often produces temporary compliance, not genuine respect. Real strength is quieter. You stop participating in conversations that repeatedly become disrespectful. You stop giving unlimited chances to someone who consistently demonstrates that they do not value them. This is not cruelty, it is discernment. You must understand that every relationship contains an invisible negotiation of expectations. When you repeatedly violate your own standards to preserve a relationship, you teach the other person that keeping you requires very little consideration. And eventually resentment develops. You begin thinking, after everything I have done for them, how can they treat me this way? But sometimes the uncomfortable truth is that you train them to expect it. This is why boundaries must be established early, calmly, and consistently. The key word is consistently. A boundary you enforce once and abandon the next time someone pushes against it is not really a boundary. It is a temporary emotion. People will naturally test limits, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously. They want to know whether your words represent a real standard or merely a moment of frustration. So don't make dramatic declarations. Don't threaten consciously. If someone repeatedly breaks your trust, reconsider how much access they should have to your life. You don't need revenge. You need distance. There is also a deeper philosophical principle here. You cannot control other people's behavior, but you can control their access to you. That distinction gives you enormous psychological freedom. You do not need to convince everyone to respect you. You need to become willing to remove yourself from situations where Respect begins with the willingness to lose approval rather than lose yourself. So the next time someone crosses a line, don't ask, "How can I make them feel bad?" Ask a better question: what action communicates that this behavior is not acceptable to me? Then take that action calmly. Asterisk. A boundary is not a wall against people, it is a declaration of the value you place on yourself. And once you have learned to establish boundaries, they are watching what happens to you when you are challenged. Anyone can appear calm when everything is going their way. The real test comes when someone insults you, rejects you, interrupts you, criticizes you, or deliberately tries to provoke a reaction. In those moments, your emotional response reveals something about who is actually in control. If another person can make you angry whenever they want, they possess a form of power over you. This is one of the most important psychological principles to understand. Emotional reactions are often automatic. Someone says something offensive, and before you have even processed it, your body changes. When we feel disrespected, something inside us demands recognition. You cannot treat me this way. The instinct is understandable, but if you respond impulsively, You may actually give the other person exactly what they wanted, a demonstration that they can control your emotional state. This is why the pause is so powerful. A pause creates distance between stimulus and response. Someone says something provocative, and instead of immediately reacting, you allow a moment to pass, breathe, observe, then decide. That if you pretend you are not angry, while anger is silently controlling your decisions, you have not mastered yourself. You have simply hidden the reaction. Real emotional control means you can recognize what you feel without allowing the feeling to automatically dictate what you do. You can be angry and still speak calmly. You can be disappointed and still behave with dignity. You can be afraid and still make a rational decision. This is where emotional discipline becomes a form of power. Think about how easily people become predictable when they are emotionally reactive. If someone knows exactly what insult will make you angry, exactly what criticism will make you defensive, or exactly what silence will make you anxious, they have learned your psychological buttons, and once someone knows your buttons, they can push them. The solution is not to become emotionless. It is to become less predictable in your reactions, because your response is chosen rather than automatic. Sometimes you should respond, sometimes you should walk away. When they become aggressive, you do not have to mirror their aggression. When they become chaotic, you do not have to enter their chaos. In fact, lowering your emotional intensity can sometimes expose the weakness of the other person's position. Calmness creates contrast, and contrast is psychologically powerful. If everyone around you is reacting emotionally and you remain composed, your behavior communicates that you are not easily moved. You are thinking while others are reacting. But you can make a difficult decision. You can protect yourself. The difference is that your actions come from judgment rather than emotional impulse. This is why self-command is more valuable than trying to command others. You cannot control another person's ego, anger, jealousy, or insecurity, but you can control whether their emotions become your emotions. So the next time someone provokes you, don't immediately ask, "What should I say back?" Ask, "Why are they able to move me so easily?" That question turns conflict into self-knowledge. They become less powerful. The strongest person in the room is not necessarily the loudest, most aggressive, or most intimidating. It is often the person who can feel everything and still choose their response. Master your reaction, and you become much harder for anyone else to control. And now we arrive at the final principle, the one that brings everything together. Presence, independence from approval, disciplined speech, boundaries, and emotional control are powerful, but they become truly meaningful when they are supported by something deeper. A reputation built. But if your behavior repeatedly contradicts your words, people will eventually see through the performance. Human beings are remarkably sensitive to inconsistency. They may not consciously analyze every contradiction, but they notice patterns. They notice when someone promises something and doesn't deliver. They notice when a person speaks about discipline but constantly behaves impulsively. They notice when someone claims to have strong principles but abandons them the moment there is something to gain. Your reputation is essentially the memory other people have of your behavior. You can create an impression in a few seconds, but credibility requires repetition. People need to see that your behavior remains stable across different circumstances. Can you keep your word when keeping it becomes inconvenient? Can you remain composed when you are under pressure? Can you treat people with respect even when you have nothing to gain from them? Can you admit a mistake without creating excuses? These moments quietly construct your reputation. And there is something important to understand. Become the person others can rely upon when the situation becomes difficult. Competence is difficult to fake over time. A confident person who produces nothing eventually loses credibility. But a quiet person who consistently solves problems becomes influential without needing to announce their importance. This is why you should focus less on looking powerful and more on becoming useful, capable, and reliable. There is also enormous power in keeping your promises. When you say you will do something, and then you do it, you reinforce a psychological connection between your words and reality. Over time, people begin trusting your statements because they have evidence behind them. Every broken promise weakens that connection. One failure does not destroy a reputation, of course. Human beings understand mistakes, but repeated inconsistency teaches people that your words should be discounted. This is why you should make fewer promises and keep more of them. There is another dimension to reputation that is often overlooked: how you behave when nobody can reward you. If your principles are not really principles, they are strategies for appearance. Character is revealed when nobody can reward you. And begin asking, what kind of person am I becoming? That is a much more powerful question. Because when your identity becomes grounded in your own standards, you no longer need to constantly monitor how others perceive you. You know what you stand for. You know what you will not compromise. You know what you are capable of. And ironically, that internal certainty often produces the external respect you were originally searching for. But don't expect everyone to respect you. Some people will dislike your boundaries. Your goal is consistency between your values, your words, and your actions. When those three become aligned, you develop something far more powerful than an impressive image. You develop character. And character does not need to announce itself. It becomes visible through repetition. So build your reputation patiently. Let your actions speak when your words are unnecessary. Become reliable. Become competent. Keep your promises. Protect your standards, admit your mistakes, and